Hello and welcome to the Yo Soy Pachamamista YouTube channel. I am Katie Gatita, and today I am so excited and honored because I have Emilee Saldaya with us. Emilee is the founder and creator and director of the Free Birth Society. And Emilee, your work is so inspiring to me. It is so important for women and so important for humanity. And I'm so grateful to have you here, specifically to kind of open a door in the Spanish-speaking world about what your message is. My audience is primarily Latin American. I also have followers in Spain and then also Spanish speakers in other parts of the world. But across Latin America, it is very, very common still that there are scheduled C-sections. It is very common that women are told simply that their pelvises are just too small. And then it's also very common for people to assume that because a midwife is present, the birth is natural. And this is like, wow, we could talk for many hours. My goal today is just to make this kind of like foundation for people to know who you are and what you're sharing and really what birth is, you know. And so we have a lot to talk about. We're kind of going to flow and have a nice conversation today. I want to give you a chance to speak to who you are and talk a little bit about your path, like what led you to where you're at now.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Happy to be here. Appreciate your interest in this because I agree it is so important. And also I would offer that though it is common in Latin America, there's nowhere where what you described isn't common. This is the planet today. This is industrial birth having monopolized everywhere. You know, so I hear you. And also it is the same the world over. And I'm thrilled to bring more awareness into the Spanish-speaking communities of the world because this needs to be spread everywhere. Yeah, so my name is Emilee Saldaya, and I have been a birth attendant since I was a teenager. I've been in birth work since I was 16. I attended my first birth at 17, and I exclusively worked within the system. So when I use that term, I'm meaning the medical paradigm, which is very much includes medical midwifery. It includes home birth with medical midwives, birth centers, and obviously hospital births. And so I was a doula for a very long time and a medical midwife's assistant in home births. And I also ran a nonprofit, founded and ran a nonprofit in Los Angeles that specifically focused on serving low-income families. I primarily work with immigrant families, non-English speaking families, then across the board, incarcerated mothers and teen moms and all sorts of different groups of mothers. Yeah, and so I got a real crash course in my 20s around the reality of birth under this umbrella of industrial birth, which really is, like I was just saying, you know, the world over in the technocratic model. And so the short version is I had all these different businesses within the birth world. That was my whole life. It still is in a different way. And I just didn't have the language for what I was witnessing. And now I do. And so what I was witnessing again and again and again was obstetrical violence, total birth sabotage, abuse to mother baby, you know, medical kidnapping, just normalized coercion and assault, really, within these births that I was hired to be a part of, to support and on. So because really what I'm doing in taking, where I've taken this work into the public arena, there really wasn't much public criticism of obstetrics and medical midwifery when I was a doula. And so it was very hard for me to find any camaraderie in navigating really the evils that I was witnessing. I didn't have language for it. I didn't have mentors for it. I felt really alone. And so I forged my own path. Again, I'm giving you cliff notes here, but towards the end of my 20s, I was close to wanting to have my own child and realized that it was just totally unethical to continue supporting women in the system when I knew that it was not something I would have exposed my child and myself to. And so I began to say yes to families who wanted underground midwifery. I began to say yes to families who wanted to birth without medical providers, which is not in my life anymore, but it was in the consciousness I was living in then, more mainstream. That was pretty unheard of and really taboo. And so I started doing it behind the scenes, very quietly, family to family. And then I had my baby outside the medical paradigm, and I started this podcast, the Free Birth Society podcast. I might sneeze, hold on. So I started the Free Birth Society podcast, which has now just been, created this whole thing. It has a real life of its own. And I, now my body of work is focused on supporting women and their partners who want to birth outside the medical paradigm. I'm also heavily involved in coaching women around birth trauma that they've experienced and how to navigate life after that and beyond that. And then I also am very involved in my school called the Radical Birth Keeper School, and we mentor women who want to learn how to begin the path of what we call authentic midwifery, so non-medical midwifery. So yeah, all sorts of stuff going on.
Totally. So when you talk about birthing outside the system, I think a lot of people's minds will jump to, oh, that means birthing outside of a hospital. So that means birthing in a birth center or birthing at home with the midwife.
Yeah. So, most people don't have a true understanding of obstetrics and the monopoly that obstetrics has on birth culture. And so part of its function is to look like there are many different options within what is actually the same system. So medical midwives are heavily regulated. We can talk about our country. In the United States, medical midwives are heavily regulated. There's variance depending on state to state, but they are absolutely trained in the obstetrical model. They are bringing medical equipment. They are bringing oxygen. They are bringing pharmaceuticals to the home birth. They have a very high transfer rate. And they are bound by medical rules and regulations that are ultimately largely set by obstetrical standards. And then birth centers is the same thing, except even worse. They are a total wolf in sheep's clothing. They are absolutely just another branch of the medical model, 100%.
Right. Yes, I know someone who had given birth at a birth center that was connected to a hospital, and that birth center is the hospital. It's just, it's a little bit like they call it greenwashing when companies pretend like they're green. It's natural washing of birth.
It's a hospital with a quilt on the bed. It's a hospital with a picture of a flower on the wall, but the actual systemic structure in which the mother will be bound to is literally the same. And actually, there's some argument to be made that in some cases, birth centers are even more medical and intervention heavy because they don't have the OR 3 minutes down the hall. And so, yeah, there's a lot to say. I mean, I can go wherever you want with this, but the lie is that you're somehow getting a granola midwife who's gonna knit in the corner. That's absolutely not true at all. Medical midwifery is a branch of industrial birth, and it all is really just the same racket.
So I can imagine some people are listening to us and thinking, well, what's a medical midwife? Or maybe they're thinking, well, I had a midwife and she wasn't a medical midwife. So most midwives are medical midwives because, I mean, would you say that if you're a licensed midwife, you are by definition a medical midwife because
Yes.
you answer to the body that has licensed you?
Of course, yeah. So a medical midwife is a midwife who chooses medical training, which again is rooted in the obstetrical lens, which is rooted in pathology, intervention, pharmaceuticals, and on and on. And then also the choice to be licensed. You know, it's pitched to midwives that it is the compliant, safe way to cover their own butts if anything were to happen, because you are in compliance with the obstetrical model, with the medical board of your community. You can have good relationships with the hospitals and your inevitable transfers. You know, and I don't know if you want to get into like the historical context of this, but it's really quite fascinating, and it has happened the world over in kind of the same way. You know, there's some differences, but when I say medical midwife, I'm referring to any woman who has attended a medical school, a medical midwifery school, which is all of them for the most part, and now practices and is beholden to the rules and regulations of the state, which are all set within medical standards. So I'll give you an example. Vaginal exams. You know, vaginal exams are mandated by many of our states. If you're a medical midwife that chooses licensure, your framing that you have learned of how to attend birth is rooted in violating the mother. It's rooted in disruption, and it's actually quite dangerous. And so a vaginal exam holds, for example, literally no tangible information whatsoever, and yet are routinely performed on women by medical midwives, and are charted as if, you know, as if it means anything at all, other than that it is a part of the medical, you know, expectation. Third stage management, the management and the manual delivery of the placenta, you know, medical midwives. So pretty much all midwives you've ever met, most likely. And you can know this if they choose licensure, like you just said, they agree to, well, it depends on, I guess, who you ask. How I would say it is they agree to disrupt third stage, the birth of the placenta, and to really put the mother in harm, because the active third stage management means shooting the mom with Pitocin, which is incredibly dangerous, giving her a shot in her bottom usually, and then manually removing the placenta. And on it goes. So a medical provider, very much including midwives, by definition, create conditions and agree to perform in such a way that a natural, normal physiological birth becomes impossible. So what most women don't understand, just because they haven't had the kind of critical analysis laid out to them yet, or really chewed on it in this way, and this is pretty taboo stuff, you know, What they haven't considered is that they didn't actually need the vaginal exam, that they didn't actually need the Pitocin, that the midwife didn't need to save them, that their baby didn't need that, resuscitation, and on, which is very confronting. It's very confronting to try on that the abuse that I experienced didn't actually save my baby. It didn't actually save me. It was just a part of this inherently traumatic and harmful model that was enacted onto me without my understanding.
Right. It's so easy to believe stories that are false. And I think about this individually and in families and collectively. For example, in my family, we're 3 girls, I'm the middle. My older sister had the cord around her neck, and so they had to do a C-section. And then I'm the second baby, and they had to do a C-section because my mom had already had one. Of course, we know that many, many, many women birth vaginally after C-section, but this was also in 1988. But
it's the same now.
Right. Yeah. So then my third, the third baby, of course, was also a C-section because my mama had 2 others. So the story in my family, like this is exactly what you're talking about. Like the story in my family is, oh my gosh, Katie, because when I talk about these things about birth and all this stuff to my, very traditional family, and they're like, but you don't understand. Mary, my sister, she would have died. Your mom would have been hurt.
Yeah.
Like this is the story. So these stories become so kind of like they have such a grip, not on just a woman, but on a lineage.
Well, they shape the entire family's belief structure.
Right.
It's not even a grip. It is the reality, right? Like we see what we believe. And so it's more than just a grip. It literally becomes what is true for that family until questioned, until untangled, until challenged, until more information. And I just want to say something real quick about you referring to your family as traditional. I would actually call that a very modern family.
Right.
Actually, a traditional family births at home.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we did that for forever until very, very, very recently. It's very modern to get elective surgery to bring a baby into the world. But yes, of course, the stories are strong, and gosh, even when you think about, and I've seen this more times than I can count in real life, in real time as the witness, but what happens so frequently is as the mother is drugged up on the operating table, full of sedatives and narcotics, and then the baby gets pulled out, cut and then pulled out. This is really sick, Katie, but someone often whispers to the mother the reason why the C-section was needed. And sometimes it's, yep, your pelvis really is too small. Another one is, oh, there we go, cord around the neck. Another one is, oh yeah, real big baby. And so there's all these lies that you just kind of pick, off a bingo card, which doctor's going to say what at that exact moment. And what's so fascinating about this free birth world and the free birth community and how many stories I've collected, over the last 6 years is, well, how could that be true when over here, all these women are birthing with babies who have nuchal cords, which is all it is, a cord around the neck, where all these babies are born normal, physiological, and actually a nuchal cord is incredibly protective. There's a lot of genius and just so much genius to a nuchal cord. Yeah, but what I find is that the C-section has to be justified, right? You can't, for most women, they want to know why they had to have surgery. And so they lie and they grasp. Oh, cord around the neck. There we go. There it is. That's in the zeitgeist. People still believe that one. There it is. It's a lie. And again, it takes a lot of courage for people, but particularly the birthing woman, to get willing to try on that, in fact, they were lied to. That's a pretty big ask, I think, for a lot of people, and a lot of people aren't willing to do that, and that's fine. You know, that's certainly not my audience, and maybe not yours. But it is really strong in the family, and the good news to that, because if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, crap, I have a really strong surgical, and trauma-based lineage as well. I want to say two things to those people that are listening to this episode. First of all, no, you don't. You have a very, very, very short blip in your lineage where this occurred, because actually, forever, you come from mothers who free birthed. You came from mothers who survived normal physiological birth. And there's a very small blip of recent history where, yeah, you might have some modern trauma. Okay, but it is so overcomable. It's not really a word, but it is so available to heal. And that's what we're seeing in the free birth community, is women, like me and the women I surround myself with, really, really questioning this, and then returning to nature, returning to alignment, returning to self-responsibility, returning to the biological design of birth and enacting that. And as our children are born that way, and they, see their siblings be born that way, you've just healed it up, right? It's not hard to, it doesn't actually take that much to heal this kind of, I guess you could say, broken piece here.
I know a lot of women who are very involved in natural health or farming or all these things, and have spoken to him, and they say, well, just in case something happens, I need to be at a hospital.
Yeah.
And I want to say I've not given birth. I haven't done that yet. And so, I want to be respectful, and there's a lack of courage and responsibility in that. But that just is what it is. I'm not trying to say, pass a judgment. I'm just trying to say that, especially.
Well, they would say that they're responsible, actually, to utilize modern available, what's available in today's times. It doesn't feel like a lack of courage or responsibility for people who really believe that they're consciously choosing it at all. I get what you're saying, and I, of course, get the critique. And yes, there are a lot of women who think they're natural minded, who think they have organized their life around being in alignment with nature, and then go get inductions as soon as their doctor suggests it. And I've often remarked that I think birth is really kind of the final frontier of feminism, because it's the thing no one really talks about. And it's kind of a big deal. It's literally how every single person is here. Every single person has a biological mother, on and on, all the stuff we know. We are the bearers of life and death to this planet, of this human race. And yet it really speaks to how epically taboo to return to, again, what is most, in alignment with optimal health is. So what do we do with that? We look at all the layers of how people are so controlled by the media and all the propaganda and, all the lies. And then, like we already named, the lineage of trauma, and, our grandmas were all being given ether, and our parents were mostly born unconscious. It's just, there's so much intentional harm and mistruth that has been fed to us for generations, that now at this point, I feel a lot of softness for the people who are still in the dark, you know. And I also, this sounds kind of harsher than I mean it, but like, I also don't know how much I care anymore. It's like, it's all available. Like, life is available whenever you want it. And if you want to be asleep at the wheel, that's your right to be. It's fine. You know, I don't want to be. And so I look at and critique and question and explore everything I possibly can. But I don't think a lot of people are like that.
Totally. It's so interesting, right? Because 99.999999999% of people have never, even midwives, we could say, have probably never witnessed an actual physiologic birth.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? And then that segues into, well, what is free birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are those things?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, free birth means, it means birth, choosing, you know, it's the conscious choice. I think that's an important piece here. It's the conscious choice to allow birth without involving any hired professionals. You know, so it's birth outside the medical system, but I also would say it is birth without doulas. It is birth without underground midwives. It's just you at your home, calling on your own inner resources or the resources of your family. Family birth is another term I really like for it. And, you know, we don't need to get too into the semantics here, but I think as soon as you invite a doula or a you know, radical birth keeper, or someone like me, you know, who attends births in this non-professional, or sorry, non-medical way, it's different. There is a different layer of looking outside of yourself that is fundamentally not free birth. Does that make it worse or like less legit? Of course not. And it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around this. You know, it's not a competition. There's no gold standard. It's, what is your authentic, you know, truth? What do you really need? And then have that, you know? So yeah, free birth is birth outside the medical paradigm, where there's no outside management. No one is assessing you. Certainly no medical midwives or doctors. You're in your own home. It's unassisted birth. That's another term for it, though I don't use that term because it's technically a medical term. But yeah, birth without doctors and midwives. So that's that. And then physiological birth, it, you know, or undisturbed birth is birth. The term I like a lot is intact. It's birth intact, meaning that it's the birth process from beginning to end that completes intact. So there's no major disruptions, there's no interventions, there's no leaving the den, there's certainly no violations. And so the biological design of birth, which is quite incredible, and each section of birth as it unfolds dominoes to a very intentional next section of the hormonal matrix unfolding, you know, all the stuff that comes online at different stages. It's just magnificent. And so I would just say physiological birth is a birth that is essentially allowed to biologically unfold, right? Which is not possible once you leave your den. Not happening. No such thing as a natural birth in the hospital. Of course not. Yeah, you know, you can certainly you can allow a baby to come out of your body in the hospital without having drugs put in you. But I wouldn't equate that to a natural birth. You know, if we're going to say natural is physiological, you know, intact, in alignment with the biological design, an intact hormonal matrix. That's not happening if you've gotten in a car and if you've gotten under bright lights and if strangers have been inside your body and you've been hooked up to machines and been told what to do. And no, absolutely not.
Yeah, it's birth is such an intense and precious ceremony. For people who have been to some sort of ceremony, any kind, plant medicine or whatever, it's not imaginable that the person holding space at that ceremony would allow just random people to come in and out and, hey, we're going to talk now. No, it's like a very held space. The same thing with birth. It's like, that's why birthing outside of your home can really be a dangerous thing to do, because you have no say whatsoever in who is entering and leaving and when and how much this sacred space.
Well, and I would actually say it's not then a sacred space, right? If no one who is, if no one who's in the room with you gives a shit about your experience, that's going to be brutal on every level, right? Whether you can cognitively track that or not, birth is a very significant rite of passage for not just the mother, but for all involved, of the family. And there is not an ounce of reverence for that in the medical system. And in fact, there are many, many, many rituals set up to dehumanize, to degrade, and to humiliate the mother in this rite of passage, which is significant when we zoom out and look at how society grooms women and mothers to be lifelong consumers, to be insecure and broken, to be continuing, kind of like a Stockholm syndrome, to continue returning to the allopathic model. Then you bring your baby to the pediatrician every time they sneeze because you couldn't possibly be resourced enough internally, right? I mean, this is the grooming, to think for yourself, to care for your child. It's just absolutely wild, the messaging, from the beginning, right? Like you mentioned, I think before we were recording, that this is all happening on a continuum, and that's exactly right. Little girls are groomed from the beginning to care what other people think, to people please, to say yes when we mean no. And we suffer great consequences when we don't perform correctly. And so we're going through our blood mysteries, before birth. We get born. So that's our first initiation, usually into trauma. And then, maybe your mother breastfeeds, probably not. Maybe she slept with you, probably not. So there's already so many fractures happening in a really deep way, on a really, spiritual and psychological way from the very beginning. Most of our parents did cry it out, cribs and so on. And then you come into girlhood and then you get your periods, and we all know how that's treated, and Latin America is definitely a cultural, misogynistic cultural element that I've always experienced and seen and witnessed. Perhaps even more so in some ways than other cultures that I've lived in, around hiding the blood, being shamed about the blood, and on. And so then that layers happening. And then in our, in today's world, the majority of women, young girls, when they get their blood, are taken to a gynecologist. It's going to be someone they've never met before. They're, for literally no reason, going to go inside of the young girl and do an exam, which is totally, wow, right? Like, we are grooming our girls to submit from day one. So by the time you're pregnant, it's like, well, you already know that you do whatever your doctor says, and you assume they know best. And it's just another cog on the wheel of how we've been made to think we're supposed to perform for the approval of society from day one. So interrupting that pattern is a really big deal, and it requires just so much courage. And that's really what my coaching practice is made up of. And that's what is just the most fun and inspiring, element of my work, is to see how many courageous women there are out there. And specifically mothers, because when you wrong a mother and you hurt her baby, for some women, that's their wake up point. And it's unfortunate that the stakes had to be so high, but there's also a gift in how high the stakes are, because that's usually a wake up point, at least for the women that I serve and that I work with. That's their wake up point of like, oh my God, I can't ever let this happen again. And there is some liberation within exploring what that means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just this huge piece of what does it mean to become an authority for yourself? What does it mean to have an internal structure in place that like remains somewhat constant despite like the chaos of the world? Like, what does it mean to be a sovereign woman and person? What does it mean to know that I'm the expert of my body? I mean, I have a teacher that says the path to power is responsibility, and she's talking about personal power, but it's also really possible. I mean, for all of us, for me too, in many areas, to be like, whoa, am I ready for this level of responsibility? Like, whoa, this is like next level me, this is next level me that like is going to be required to stand up at this level of responsibility.
Yeah. And I will say that when you find, whatever set of tools work for you, it's one step at a time, and you create this feedback loop with yourself. It's not like 0 to 100. It's like, what am I willing to do today? What am I willing to do today? And I will speak for myself that the more I've learned how to exist in 100% responsibility, the more fun life has gotten, and the less attractive the drama stories of victim consciousness become. And so, I think that's important to know when you're new to these concepts, is just to like give yourself a break, and that you just put one foot in front of the other. You learn your tools, you read your books, you find the right, coaches or mentors or whatever. And it's like learning a new language. It really does get easier. And again, I mean, for me, it's so much more fun taking responsibility, understanding whose business is what, knowing what's mine to do and what's not mine to do. I mean, it's freedom. It's internal liberation. And the more liberation I experience and mental freedom, the more on purpose I'm able to be, and the bigger impact I have. But I think you can psych yourself out, with like crazy expectations, or just the mind is here for that, right? To just try to psych you out and cap you out. And for me, the tools that I've learned from my mentor, and anyone, can read this book, though I don't know if it's been translated in Spanish. I actually have no idea, unfortunately. But the book that I would recommend is called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And it's just, it's everything. It's been my big foundation of tools of learning how to step out of victim consciousness and into responsibility.
It's fascinating too, because birth involves, like you said, the family, the people around you. It's a rite of passage for not just woman and baby, but for others as well. And of course, the conversation comes up, well, but what if something happens?
Mhm.
What if something happens to the mom or the baby? Like, what happens when there's no one to blame?
Mhm.
I mean,
Well, you can always blame someone. I mean, if blame is your game, you'll always be able to find someone to blame. So that doesn't need to be the concern. But the what if, I hear you, and yeah, what if? I mean, the first thing that I always, like to say is we need to first presence the reality that babies die in the system, and babies are killed, and mothers are killed, on the operating table and in the obstetrical system all the time. So it's not as if we as humans have created this utopian birthing system that has actually increased survival rates. So, and that's propaganda that has occurred. I mean, look at the numbers, it's not true. Okay, so we first have to presence how real medical murder and death in the system is. Now, some of that is just babies will die. That's always been true. That will always be true. It's obviously very, very sensitive and tragic, but it is also a fact. There is no mode, there is no method of birthing for any mammal on this planet that has eradicated fetal death. Right? Ask any farmer. It occasionally occurs. Now, is it rampant? No. Sister Morningstar has one of my favorite quotes. She says, "Do you see the forest floor? Is it covered in dead primates?" And I love that, because of course it's not, because it's not very common, though it does occur. So yeah, what if? So what does what if mean? What if is a really subjective journey that each individual needs and each family needs to take. So my calculation of risk is going to be different than your calculation of risk. Risk is incredibly subjective. There's no, there's no like monarch of risk assessment, it's not how it works. It's subjective. So I will say, and this can land fairly radical, but I will say that spontaneous death of my growing fetus, spontaneous death, meaning that my baby, for unknown, natural reasons in pregnancy or birth, completed their life cycle within me, is not the worst outcome I can come up with. It's really not. I'm not saying I want that. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be all of the obvious things it would be, but it's not the worst thing I can think of. The worst thing I can think of is what I have seen doctors, nurses, and midwives do to women and children. That is the worst thing I can think of. And I don't know how gruesome and detailed you would want me to be. So I'll just be vague unless otherwise invited, but it's bad. And it's so bad that I'm saying that actually spontaneous stillbirth and birthing my baby at home, would absolutely be my choice to birth my baby at home, should, in either way, either whether they live or survive, live or die. Anyway, the what ifs is a really personal thing to sit with. And I would say women who choose free birth are willing to sit with it in a much deeper way, because it's pretty hard to have cognitive dissonance and choose free birth. it's very easy to have cognitive dissonance and choose hospital birth because there is an illusion that nothing bad will happen. And there is an illusion that if a baby does die in the hospital, it's on the, understanding that they did and tried everything for that baby to survive, but it's just actually not true. I've seen babies be murdered. I've seen them actually die before my eyes in pregnant women from too much Pitocin, from too many pharmaceuticals, from treatment in the NICU. I mean, I'm in it, I've been in the trenches of this world, like I said, since I was a teenager. So this isn't, these aren't made up things. These are things I've literally seen with my own eyes, unfortunately. Yeah. So it depends on your risk assessment. And I think that's important to presence, that every path in life has its own set of risks, right? So when you go to the grocery store, you're going to get in your car. Now, we accept the risks of driving in our cars, right? Because it's so integrated into society. But we also know that driving our cars is actually like mind-bogglingly dangerous, right? I mean, really dangerous. And we all accept that risk and we do it. And we put our kids in the cars and, we talk on the phone in our cars, and we take a great risk every time we get in our cars, and we do it. And on and on. I know someone who, long time ago, it was the uncle of my friend, but I knew him, and he was eating alone in his apartment. He was eating and he choked and he died. Okay, so there is risk to eating alone. Yeah, you could be one of those people that choke and die. So does that mean you're never going to eat alone? Of course not. Does that mean you're never going to drive a car? Of course not. There's risk to never leaving your house. There's risk to leaving your house. You get my point. So there is a different set of risks for birthing in the hospital. There's a set of risks for birthing at home without a hospital. Is it possible that you're going to be one of the incredibly rare, incredibly unlikely, tiny percent of women who actually need or would benefit from, there's no such thing as need, but like would truly benefit from or have a life, a life-saving need that the OR could help you? Yeah, that's a risk that you take when you birth at home. And so for me, it's about like alchemizing the risks and what risks can I live with? And that's what we all as mothers have to ask ourselves, what risks, what set of risks can I live with? And for me, understanding birth like I do, understanding the system like I do, and really, again, I mean, this is really what it is, really understanding birth and having a very close relationship to it, having it seen work very well in undisturbed scenarios, and on and on and on. My set of risk analysis says I am safest at home, my baby is safest at home, and I and my baby are absolutely safest being as far away from a medical provider as possible.
Mm-hmm. The gift of the podcast, of your podcast, is that we are able to hear stories of so many different women from so many different backgrounds who have experienced what it's like to just allow their body to do what it's designed to do. So I do recognize that, oh, wow, people who don't speak English and can't listen to the Free Birth Society podcast, they might.
But can't on YouTube, can't you turn it to Spanish?
I mean, the subtitles are not, it doesn't do that for most videos. when I translate stuff, I actually translate it. Like I translate it and either add the subtitles to YouTube or put them on the itself. I mean, maybe they do that for some videos. I mean, for like TED Talks and stuff, you can do that, but that's because they've put the subtitles into that video.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so I'm just kind of acknowledging like, oof, I think that there's a lot of work to be done, but not, I mean, everywhere, like you said from the beginning, this is a whole global situation that we've got ourselves in.
Yeah, and women need to share their stories because women speaking is the, it's like the kryptonite to patriarchy. When women are no longer isolated and they actually speak, stuff changes. So, I mean, that was my inspiration for the podcast, was like, all right, well, let's have the women speak about these choices. How did they untangle? What was their birth story when they birthed in the system, and what did it look like for them to step into free birth, and kind of debunk this idea that women who free birth are these like wild, hippie, barefoot idiots, which is like the pitch, right? Oh, those crazy, irresponsible women. It's like, well, actually it's women of every walk of life, every religion, every age. What do you do with that? They're very smart, they're very logical, they have a lot of wisdom to share, and they are quietly just choosing free birth. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's totally beautiful. Another interesting piece of the puzzle is not just the birthing woman, but her partner. What is her partner's perspective and relationship to birth? And what is that like to, I mean, ideally, you'll have a partner that's totally on board with your vision for your birth, and that's not always the case.
Depends on what you choose, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, lots of women are willing to be with men who don't respect them, who don't support them, who don't want them to be powerful. That doesn't work for me. That's not what I chose. But yes, many, many men are incredibly intimidated by women stepping into their power and are very confused about free birth. And often a question I get is, well, then if a doctor's not here, I'm in charge? Like they can't figure out that the woman would actually be in charge. So it really reveals a tremendous amount of misogyny, whether they're aware of it or not. And usually what I say to willing fathers is, of course you're nervous. So what? So what? Literally, so what? What does it have to do with anything? Like, it's fine. Of course you're nervous. Birth is crazy and it's a big deal. And we're unraveling 100 years of bullshit and propaganda. Of course you're nervous. So what helps you not be nervous? You figure it out. You're an adult. Act like it. Need to read a book? Your wife's read 20. Want to listen to a podcast? I've got 6 seasons. Like they're not babies, and I'm not into coddling adults, just because they have a penis. It just makes absolutely no sense to me. So a lot of what I see women do is this will be a pivot point for them in their relationships where they will step in to responsibility and be willing to let the chips fall where they will. And I've seen a lot of up-leveling on the male's part because of it. And I love that. And I appreciate that. And I, of course, I love watching men step up and meet their women as they claim their power. And of course, I see a lot of marriages not make it because it was rooted in her staying small and broken.
Mm-hmm. Bouncing from that to free birth or family birth at home by yourself with your partner who's on board with you, a lot of people will speak up and say, well, the most traditionally women were present, like you had other women at your birth, like that free birth maybe is not the most traditional way of giving birth. Instead, it was women of your village or your tribe were around you.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, I mean, it depends on everything, and it depends on where we're at in our history. Like, I don't think it makes any sense to try to live a way that we theoretically lived 500 years ago, right? We have to live now. And what I know is true now is that most women who want to birth outside the system can't find any women.
Right.
You know, I think a lot of women who choose free birth with just their partner would love a sister involved, would love an auntie to be with the kids and to clean up. And that's not the world we live in right now. And that's part of what we're trying to create with RBK school and my membership and all the stuff that we're doing. Because I would like to see women step up and normalize these choices. But the vast majority of women that, you know, I track choosing these birthing choices and mothering choices are incredibly alone, incredibly gaslit by the women of their lives, and their mothers don't understand, their sisters all had C-sections, etc. So we're working with what we got. You know, I live in kind of a particular reality where all my friends free birth, and you know, my last baby I just had 6 months ago, I chose to only have my partner present, my husband, my male husband. And that was exactly what I wanted and needed for that birth. But I think ultimate power and liberation is being so resourced in yourself, in your marriage, and in your community that you can roll with what you want as it unfolds. Right. And so, I mean, even in our crew here, we have, you know, 9 or 10 families here, and women are having their babies, and some women choose to have some of us there and others choose to be alone with their husbands. And I don't think that means anything other than they're choosing what they choose about what's right for them, you know?
Right. I would love to hear, I know that it could be a whole podcast in and of itself, but a little bit about either or both of your birth stories. Is there something that you want to highlight from either of those experiences? How long ago was your first birth?
My daughter is 5.
How long did that labor last?
Yeah, that was a totally average amount, and it was a doozy. It was about 52 hours. And learned a lot. I love that birth. And it was, I didn't, well, this is why they're called blind spots, right? I didn't know what I didn't know. And I realized in hindsight that I had made up a story that because no one was there to abuse me, because I wasn't afraid of birth, it would go quicker. It would go quick. I just accidentally made this up and didn't realize I had made that up. You know, it was all unconscious. And then it revealed itself that after 24 hours, I started to self-sabotage. And after 24 hours, I just started to really trip about the time. And this, I mean, first time moms do this all the time. And it was, I confused myself. I psyched myself out because of this unconscious story that it should be going faster. Yeah. and I love it. And I learned so much, and it was so humbling. And, you know, for me in particular, because of my life in this birth work world, I have attended hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of births before myself having a child. And so that initiation was so beautiful and so big and humbling, and yeah, and it was a firewalk for sure. And just the postpartum of her, I was in Hawaii, and we just really created a dream situation for our family to become a family. And gosh, I just had no idea how psychedelic postpartum could be. And it was just so beautiful. Yeah, I really treasure it. And this one, oh my goodness, this one was only 6 hours. But it rocked me. My first birth wasn't painful. I wouldn't describe my first birth as painful. It was more heady. Like I said, because I made up that there was an issue, but the physicality of a long birth was very manageable. And I see this supported. But the 6-hour birth for me, man, I'm such a resourced person, and I've done a lot of plant ceremony stuff. I've, done years of meditation and blah, 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 blah. And it didn't matter at all. I was so rocked. I was so, so, so rocked. It felt like when you're in the ocean and the waves are pummeling you and you're just trying to stay up. After about 3 hours, my last 3 hours, I was just like being pummeled and just trying to hang on. Yeah. It was really brutal and amazing, obviously, because that's what it does, but it was way more physically painful than my first, which just was so surprising to me, and super trippy, psychedelic visuals, talking in tongues. You're just in so many different dimensions at once when you're in that cosmic space. And it was also really healing. And it was really healing to not have anyone hero me in my birth, because it was held by only my husband, who is very perfect for me. I don't know how else to say it. He's very grounded. He's really not afraid of me at all, and not afraid of my power and birth and all of that. And so he just was really the tree for me. And in my first birth, I had invited 2 women there who were wonderful. One was my blood sister. They were totally wonderful and well-intended, but I do think they had some nervousness, and you're so psychic when you're in labor, and you're tracking so much as the mama tiger, It was really nice for this one. That was probably my favorite part, that at one point I was on my hands and knees, and I was just, in it. And I just cried out, "I'm so scared." And I just said it, and he didn't say anything. And I'm in this bathroom of 1,000 candles, and I wasn't scared of anything in this world. It wasn't like I was thinking something was wrong. It was like, I'm getting called into the great beyond, and it's fucking scary. And I could feel when my water broke, I went and purged. My waters opened, and there was a rush of oxytocin, and then immediately I had to throw up, and I ran into the bathroom, and it was very similar to a plant medicine purge. It was as I was throwing up, I was getting pulled into the next layer of whatever that life is, like cosmic underworld, I don't know. And I could feel it. And I was like throwing up and my eyes rolling back. And I was like, oh God, I'm going. It's wild, man. It is so wild.
That
But it was only 6 hours.
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh, that sounds just so epic. I mean, that I've always wanted to give birth. I mean, it just sounds incredible. Oh my gosh. See, it's just so, yeah, it's just incredible. I mean, so incredible.
It really is. And then, I mean, having an intact labor and catching your own baby and learning that it's a boy or a girl and watching them take their first breath and you know, getting your placenta out of you on your own, and like just the whole delicate step to step that just occurs when no one messes with you is so it's like this massive up level of who you are as a woman when you go through that untraumatized, you know, when you go through that intact and nothing's taken from you. You are more whole on the other side. You are more ready to now, for me, mother 2 children and to step even deeper into my embodied power and to make even more money and to be even more creative. And that is the design. I truly believe that, because that is what I see in my life and in all of these women in my life who are living this way. It's just, it's amazing. And of course our society seeks to destroy that. We can't have millions of embodied, powerful women around the world. Of course not. How would any of these systems work?
Yeah, totally. It's just, it's just so spectacular, you know, what women are capable of, who we are. I mean, powerful embodied women are medicine for their families and for their communities and for the world. I mean, it's just so incredible.
Yeah, it really is.
So before we close, I want you to be able to share your work. There are people who listen to my stuff that speak English, so they will be able to, you know, they will be able to investigate and look into your podcast and your offerings. And then there are people who just speak Spanish, and those people have this interview, and that's a really nice seed to plant, because I know there are people, of course, there are women in Latin America who are free birthing. And so it's just, yeah, big time.
Yeah. And we are translating the Complete Guide to Free Birth into Spanish. And so that'll be ready sometime next year. So that's at least something nice.
Yeah, that's incredible. So the Complete Guide to Free Birth is an online course for women and their partners to learn about what it means to allow physiological birth to happen.
Yeah, it's like childbirth education. It is childbirth education, but from a free birth perspective. So it's learning how to untangle, you know, what prenatal care is and how to DIY your prenatal care. It's a whole critical analysis of the industrial system that I think is incredibly important to, you know, digest. How to set boundaries with family, you know, stuff that comes up, understanding what normal birth is. We you know, we navigate the complications, unexpected variations of normal. It's super in-depth. Immediate postpartum, wild mothering, what the birth dance looks like, things for the partner to know. Yeah, there's a lot of information.
That's amazing. So I will definitely be able to share that with my audience when that's ready in Spanish. That will be such a great resource. And people can also find you on Free Birth Society podcast and Radical Birth Keepers School, which is facilitating that women can learn what it means to be a keeper of birth space. And I think that's all. Are there any other final thoughts or words of wisdom or stories or anything you want to share before we close?
We have a written blog of free birth stories if reading is more your vibe. And then I'm on Instagram at Free Birth Society, where we post videos and birth submissions. We have a private membership that, you know, women interested in free birth and wild mothering are welcome to apply to join. And I have a very limited coaching practice for women wanting to prepare for free birth and or process their births in the system. Yeah, and if you are able to travel and you want to come to an all women's epic festival with Katie and I, my festival over the summer is called Matriarch Rising Festival, and you can learn all about that at matriarchrisingfestival.com. And it's a couple hundred women coming together in North Carolina in the Blue Ridge Mountains, no men allowed. And so it's just guards down, sisterhood. Oh, it's so good. So we're both going to be there and come hang out with us.
Yes, I'm going to put all those links below this video and share widely. I'm so excited for Matriarch Rising. It'll be my 35th birthday, so I'm really excited to be there. And Emilee, thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful. I'm so truly grateful for your work and for what it means for all women, and particularly for me as a woman who will give birth one day. I'm so grateful. And I wish you continued success and abundance and satisfaction and fulfillment with your service to the world. Thank you for being part of this channel, and have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you in June.
Yes, see you in June.